So, uh, 28 years later, The Bone Temple just released at time of recording today, January 16th. And I tried to make a review for 28 years later, the first one that came out last June. And I really loved the trailer. And I made a review, made a really long review, but for some reason, YouTube would not allow me to upload it. Instagram would not allow me to upload it. I was having trouble, technical issues. So I guess I would just do my 28 years later retro review here, sort of give you my thoughts and my first impressions and all that. Everything that I think about this movie in the last couple months since it's been released, at least the last 8 months since it's been released, and how it may affect the Bone Temple before I go see it later today. And then I will give you a review of the Bone Temple. So, I love the 28 Days Later franchise. 28 Days Later is obviously one of the greatest zombie movies ever made. 28 Weeks Later is not as good, but the opening 10 minutes is better than any of the movies that have ever been made in this franchise. And 28 Years Later had a lot of anticipation, a lot of hype around it, especially after a really banger trailer. The trailers really what got me hooked. It made me sort of fear the infected. It made me fear the rage zombies. And with that, I was expecting that this would be a renaissance for zombie media because we desperately needed a renaissance of zombie media with The Walking Dead being shit and with everything else being pretty much garbage, with Zombieland not producing a lot more. You know, I need some good zombie shit where I can be afraid of the zombies. And that's what the trailer really sold me on. And it doesn't seem like that was ultimately what the movie ended up being. The movie was not as advertised. And so there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, right? So let's talk about the bad first. Let's get the bad out of the way. The movie has two sides of it. It is, and I'm just going to say right now, spoilers, by the way. There will be spoilers in this video, but there's two sides. It's written by Alex Garland and directed by Danny Boyle, which, you know, is, of course, a good scenario when you factor in the fact that they are the original creators and the original writer and director of 28 Days Later. And the movie is like one half Danny Boyle, one half Alex Garland. And you can kind of tell where the differentiations start to come in. And the fact that the movie starts off for the first half as sort of this weird sort of experimental fantasy in the zombie genre where it's a little bit disorienting and confusing and shows a lot of interjecting clips of old footage during scenes. It's very disoriented and artsy fartsy. Now I like that, but it can throw people off, and it threw me off a little bit. It made me a little bit confused because it was a little bit too indie film for me, you know. Now the iPhone cameras also kind of a weird thing to do. I appreciate the art around that. I appreciate the effort and the craft, but the shots may not have been worth it because they made it look like it was a video game, and it kind of did not benefit anything for the story. Another bad thing is that when you factor in like how dirty they did Jamie, which I think is Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, you were expecting that he would be the main character throughout the entire movie, but instead it was more of a bait and switch that his son would be the main character. Now, it's not a bad thing. I like a father-son story, but this fell into the trap of another bad father kind of thing, right? I would like to prefer that he's a misunderstood father, not necessarily a bad father, but we're going to see how the second one plays out. And not to mention, there's a lot of plot holes. There's a lot of plot holes that make you go like, well, okay, if the second one is good, then I'll forgive these plot holes. But here's the problem with that logic. When you look at Lord of the Rings, for example, right? A lot of people say, oh, you won't judge Fellowship of the Ring because, Frodo didn't put the ring in Mordor, in the volcano at the end of the Fellowship because it was supposed to be a planned trilogy. That's true, but we know that it's a planned trilogy based off the books. 28 Years Later does not have books. In fact, they needed these two movies that they filmed back to back to be profitable to even finance the third movie, which as of right now is in development. It has been confirmed that it is being developed. And so there was no basis. There was no source material. So we have to judge it accordingly. If the second one is just as bad as the first one, then it makes the first one look worse. This is what happened to the Star Wars sequel trilogy. The Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy, I should say. Is there was no plan. And it starts to get confusing. I ask questions, logically, like, how did the NATO boat get sunk? How did it get sunk and then leave all those Swedish soldiers to come to the island and then get attacked by the Alpha and the infected? It was cool to see the interaction between the Swedish soldier and Spike, the kid, but how did they get there? And then, are you telling me that we're just retconning 28 weeks later by saying that it only stopped at Europe, and then we're not going to show the part where they enclosed Europe? We're just going to say that, the UK is the only place that's infected right now? There's a lot of world building problems with that. I was expecting that it'd be more post-apocalyptic and that the entire world was consumed by rage, zombies. And of course, I forget that this is Alex Garland, and I forget that he works mostly in allegory operations. So basically, the infected are an allegory for non-vaxxed people or something, right? It's some bullshit, dumb thing like that, which, you can do that, I guess, but I'm not really particularly interested in that. I just want a good zombie story. I just want a good zombie story that I can latch onto. The woman that had dementia, Spike's mother, played by Jodie Comer, I don't remember her name, she was led on to be like this. She might have been infected. She might have had a cure. It's very possible that she, could be immune or something. But Spike takes her to Dr. Kelson, who's played by Ralph Fiennes. And look, I love Ralph Fiennes. I think he is great in just about everything that he's in. In this case, I have to ask questions about Dr. Kelson. Because how the fuck do you have a gigantic shrine, a bone temple, in the middle of the mainland, which is run by a rage infected? How the fuck are you managing to keep that bone temple up? How do you come across so many people that you could build a temple like that over the last 28 years, right? No, I get it. I might be overthinking it, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I get it. He's covering himself in iodine or something, and it's protecting him because it's like a masking the scent. But this is the problem that I had. Like, if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I wanted the zombies to be scary again. I wanted them to have fear-inducing elements about them. The first 28 days later, it was famous for making them runners. It was making zombies runners, and that induces fear. And in a lot of ways, these rage infected needed that in this movie. And in this case, it didn't happen because Dr. Kelson was able to stop the Alpha. It immediately takes the danger out of the situation. And there's lots of scenarios like that in the movie where Dr. Kelson will put himself or put other characters in danger and come out of it completely fine. Spike manages to stay on the mainland and survive on his own on the mainland against the rage infected before he runs into the Jimmy cult. Like, how the fuck is he able to do that? Because we're supposed to believe that the mainland is like this most dangerous thing ever, and it's full of the rage infected, and you got to be careful going on the mainland. And there's a beautiful scene where they show the Alpha running to chase Jamie and Spike back onto the island, which was a terrifying scene. Edge of your seat. I loved it. That's the kind of shit that I like. But then you contradict that by saying, oh, well, he can just survive on his own out there. Like, with his, not only alone, but also when he's being hampered by his mom, who's mentally ill and got brain cancer, I think. that's what they revealed is to be cancer, which is why she ends up passing away. Which I was slow to believe that she would pass away, that she had a bigger role. But now that I see that she's not in the sequel, I'm like, okay, well, maybe she really is dead, and that was pointless, right? It was a long, drawn out scene that was pointless. And now it takes away the danger. It takes away the danger of the mainland being this, wild western, sort of like outlaw badlands kind of shit, right? Of course, the Jimmy cult was, thrown out of left field, and we saw at the very beginning of the movie, it opened with the scene of this Jimmy character when he's very young, and when the outbreak happened with the rage virus, his father, who was a church pastor, being consumed by the infected, and then Jimmy goes on to start a cult of Jimmys. Now, that's what the sequel is going to be about. We're going to learn a little bit more about them in the sequel, but I'm under the impression this is a character based off of the person Jimmy Savile, which I will not profess to know a whole ton about. I'm not an expert on that. I'm not from the UK, but I've just heard some really terrible things about that guy, so it's already a very terrible villain. But we're gonna see. We're gonna see how the movie plays out, and I'm willing to be, optimistic. And when I say terrible villain, I mean like an actual good villain, like somebody who's a piece of shit that you can hate, right? But I'm worried about Dr. Kelson's character because I feel like this movie, 28 days or 28 years later, sort of opened up the door and a lot of questions about the world 28 years after the original infection and a lot of plot holes. I mentioned a lot of the plot holes, and I feel like this Bone Temple movie is only going to raise more questions and not answer any of the previous questions, and then give you an unsatisfying answer before you have to wait a couple years until the third one, the threequel, comes out, the third sequel. And so essentially this movie was a little bit more disappointing than I initially believed. And having that sort of like that half artsy fartsy structure and then half standard movie structure didn't make sense to me. The birthing scene on the train didn't make any sense. I get that the placenta, helps the baby survive the womb of the infected mother. And that's something I liked, was the saying that their culture, the infected are still living, so they are creating culture. They eat, they survive, they drink, they fuck. Like, so it was almost like a nature documentary. So those are the things that I liked, was seeing the effort put into the little world building that they did have, but the problem I had was not enough of the world building was explained, and a lot of it was artsy fartsy. And as much as I liked the artistic stuff, it doesn't help me explain the plot. The variant zombies and the how they survive out there and how they became variants. There's questions. I have questions. Of course, I'm willing to wait to see the entire vision, the entire trilogy played out. I'm willing to wait and see how it plays out. But if the second movie isn't good, it doesn't make the first movie better. It makes it worse. Now, what I liked about this movie, the father-son dynamic, the acting is great. Ralph Fiennes is awesome. I love the Bone Temple just in concept, even though I think it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm willing to be optimistic about this franchise. I am, but I can only do that for so long. If I start getting bored, I move away. I was sunk into The Walking Dead, and now I'm at a sunk cost. I have to finish it. I have to keep going. But with this, I can stick with the first two movies and be fine. That's just how it be with me. But I'm sure I'm missing a lot. I'm sure, there's a lot about this movie that I have to say and just don't have time to say it all or don't have the care to say it. But those are my thoughts on 28 years later, prior to the Bone Temple. So it's not so much of a review as it is sort of like my concerns going into the Bone Temple. So let me know what y'all think about the comments down below. And yeah, I'll see y'all after the Bone Temple.